My name is Henry HAAS, and I was born April 8, 1938 in Berlin, Germany. Well, my parents were born respectively 1911, 1914 in Berlin, both to German Jewish families that had histories going back hundreds of years in Germany. And so they grew up as children during the period of the First World War. And then going into the 1920s when Adolf Hitler first started getting into the picture, they were teenagers. And then if you move fast forward into the 1930s, early 1930s, my father was in the fur business as a young man in Germany. My mother was a student who wanted to be a school teacher until in 1935, because she was Jewish, she was no longer permitted to go to the university to finish her studies. In 1933, Hitler and the Nazi Party took entire control of the country, enacted laws that limited and restricted Jews from practicing certain professions, educational opportunities, and of course, a wave of anti-Semitism was growing all the time in that period. And now, as I said, my parents are still young people, and they're in the midst of all of that, and they're hanging on despite what is going on there. And actually, in 1935, they were married. And by the way, they grew up living in the same apartment house. The two families lived in the same apartment house in Berlin, and so they knew each other from the time they were children. And as I said, 1935, 21, 25 years old, they got married in the midst of all of that going on. And at the same time, there were people who were leaving, who were trying to immigrate. Some were successful in immigrating to, for instance, the United States, although there was a very limited quota with regard to the number of people that could enter the United States from Germany during that period. But they went other places also. One of my father's sisters went to Calcutta, India, actually, with her husband. And so there were people that were leaving, but my parents were hanging on. And so they marry in 1935. As I said, I'm born in 1938. But by the time I was born, they had made up their mind that they would have to leave. They would have to go someplace. But at that particular point in time in history, it wasn't a matter of saying, oh, well, I'll go to Australia, I'll go to England. You just couldn't get a visa. You couldn't get to where particularly you wanted to go. So the question was, what are they going to do? And actually, I was born in, as I said, in April, and by July of that year, they left Berlin with me in tow. What we're talking about is a period of almost 15 months, well over a year, where the first stop, they went from Berlin to a place in Hungary where my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, was from. And they were there briefly, but then the Germans came, and so then they left. And from there, essentially, they went to Prague, Czechoslovakia. And they were in Prague for approximately 9 months. We managed to get tickets to go on a ship to Shanghai, China. My parents were provided tickets by a French Jewish assistance organization, and we got on a ship that left from Marseille, France, on the coast of France, with give or take about 2,000 people on board, and that ship made a voyage of 3 weeks that went through the Suez Canal in Egypt, around the Horn of Africa, and Djibouti, Colombo, Saigon, Hong Kong, and then landed in Shanghai, China. And so at this stage, my parents, who were still in their 20s, arrived in Shanghai, China with a 15-month-old baby. And now the question is, what's supposed to happen here? By the time we arrive, relatively speaking, we have no funds left. And the choice when you landed there, by that time, this was the latter part of this little exodus of these 20,000 people. So by that time, there are international relief organizations working in Shanghai to try to help the refugees that are coming in. And there are also, as part of that, there are 2 large refugee camps which are located in an area of Shanghai called Hongqiu. Shanghai at that time has got the distinct sectors, and one of them is the international sector. And in the international sector, there's a little area of about 1 square mile, which is called Hongqiu. And in Hongqiu is where the refugee camps were located. What was also in Hongqiu was old row houses that had been converted to rent single rooms in. My father was a pretty independent sort of person who sort of figured out what to do, whatever the circumstances were. And he was not going to go into the refugee camp, and so the decision was that we would rent one of these rooms. And so the end of that is that we had a room on the second floor of a row house that was about 10 by 12, that had no kitchen and no toilet facilities. And we moved into this single room, and that's actually where I grew up. And I lived in that single room for 8 years with my parents while we were in Shanghai. But my father decided that he wanted to try to keep his independence, and so that's how we started in Shanghai. Now, I should add that my father's parents had preceded us in arriving in Shanghai. And they had already had a room, and actually had a little bit more than one room, and they had another area when we arrived in Shanghai. And so during the war, throughout the period that I grew up there, I had those grandparents there that I grew up with. Unfortunately, my mother's parents did not leave Germany, did not leave Berlin, and primarily because, first of all, they were attempting to get visas to come to the United States because there were some relatives in New York that were willing to sponsor them. Secondly, my grandfather, my mother's father, we're talking about father and mother, had been a German soldier in the First World War, and he felt that they were protected, that he couldn't envision, apparently, that something would happen to them. Unfortunately, they ended up among the last 5,000 people to survive in Berlin, and they were shipped out to Auschwitz in the spring of 1943. And by the way, I also had a aunt and uncle on my father's side, his sister and her husband and their son, Arno, my first cousin, that were also in Shanghai. And on my mother's side, there was also a sister and her husband and their son, Arnold. And so I did have the family stability, so to speak, during this period of time that I grew up in Shanghai for these 8 years. There are 20,000 refugees that managed to get into Shanghai, and of those, probably a majority ended up living in the circumstances that I've described. But on the other hand, there were some who still had resources when it came to Shanghai, so they ended up renting apartments in what I mentioned previously, like the French sector or the English sector. They lived outside of the Hangzhou area where most of us were. And so what happens is that in 1943, as I said, the Japanese took over control the same day as Pearl Harbor, but that area that we lived in was still open and unrestricted. At the beginning of 1943, and there's a whole book about this, but there was a German Gestapo officer in Tokyo who basically wanted the Japanese to work cooperatively to exterminate us, with 20,000 people. And the end result is that, for reasons that are too complex to go into here, but the Japanese would not agree to do that. So what they ended up doing was proposing a compromise, and the compromise was to take that area where the majority of the Jewish refugees were already living and to turn it into an actual ghetto, an enclosed area that you could not enter or exit without a pass, and that was guarded by Japanese soldiers. And they called it the designated area. So the designated area was described geographically as being this area in Hangzhou. And there's a proclamation that directed that the Japanese called us stateless refugees, that all of the stateless refugees as of May 1, 1943, must live in the designated area. So the people that were living in their apartments in the French sector or whatever, they had to leave. They had to find a space or something in this compact little area where we had already been living. And after that, it was a closed off, guarded ghetto. And if you wanted to get out of there, you had to get a pass. For me, from a kid's perspective, it was what it was, and I liked my school. I liked my religious education. I had family there, and so that was it. And I guess the other aspect I would just mention briefly is that we did have a little bit of direct effect of the war at the end of the war in 1945, when American forces were bombing Japan before the atomic bomb was dropped, they were just bombing it every day. And so we had American airplane forces coming back from bombing raids over Japan that dropped some bombs in the area where we lived. Um, and this is not a criticism of what they did. They did it because of the fact that we had the Japanese army presence within that sector. So there were about 150 or so, I think, of the refugee community that were killed um, by shrapnel, primarily, I think, from bombs that were dropped during that time. But my recollection would be air raid sirens, because we had air raid sirens and you would have to run to the nearest. They didn't have bomb shelters, but just to the nearest something where you could try to get out of the way. And that happened towards the end of the period. After the war was over in 1945, we had to wait for 2 years to get our visas to come to the United States. Um, but eventually we did. And so in I guess it was late March of 1947, just shortly before my 9th birthday, we got on another ship in Shanghai to make the voyage to the United States. And this time, that ship, it had about 250 of the refugee community that were on board this ship, among other passengers, non-refugee passengers. I don't know exactly how many, and the ship had uh, different classes, first, second, third, and then below deck, and we were below deck in hammocks in that ship. And of course, I'd never been on a ship, and I still remember to this day when that ship left and it got stormy, and there was a portal, a hole there, and the ship started rocking, and the water started coming up above the portal, and I thought we were going to die. But that's a recollection I have of starting out on that voyage. But eventually, that ship went from Shanghai, and the first step was Yokohama, Japan. Now, this is immediately, well, no, I'm sorry, this is a couple of years after the war, but still, we couldn't get off the boat in Yokohama, although I still have a vision of docking there. But the next stop was in Honolulu, Hawaii, where we did get off the ship, and I went swimming at Waikiki Beach. Although I don't have a direct, my mother always said I swam in my underwear because I didn't have a bathing suit. But whatever, we did stop in Honolulu. And then from there, the ship went to San Francisco, where it was the final destination. The ship landed the day before my 9th birthday, April 7th of 1947. So we land in San Francisco, and we're back to the question, where do we go again? So we were put up on a temporary basis by a Jewish assistance organization again, and there was a little hotel called the Powell Hotel, and they put us up there temporarily while the decision was made, where do we go? And there was a refugee resettlement committee again, and the proposition was that if we settled somewhere in the West Coast, and the choice that they gave my parents were Phoenix, Arizona, Seattle, Washington, or Portland, Oregon, and they knew nothing about any of these places. But if we were willing to settle in one of these places, that there would be some assistance until they got on their feet. And so the choice was made to go to Portland, Oregon. And why Portland, Oregon? Well, apparently, as I got the story, my father and my mother were shown some pictures, and particularly around Portland, Oregon, there were a lot of trees and a lot of greenery, and it reminded them of southern Germany. And they said, let's go to Portland, Oregon. And so after about 2 weeks, I think it was, up to 2 weeks in San Francisco, by train, we are chucked off to Portland, Oregon. And that's where we started our life in the United States. We were in Portland, Oregon for 3 years, during which time my father managed to find work. He got a job in Portland with what they used to call in the old days a retail dry goods store, which is the kind of store where there's one of everything that anybody might need. And then when his English became better, he became a traveling salesman. And then this place where he started out in Portland, Oregon, in the retail dry goods store, the man that owned that made him a proposal that if my dad wanted to open up a store someplace, a retail store, that he would help him do it. And my father picked Centralia, Washington, which was the second stop after Portland, Oregon. So it's 3 years in Portland, Oregon. And by the time I'm 12, I end up in a little farm town at that time of about 4,000 people in Centralia, Washington. I transitioned from the streets of Shanghai at age 9 to the streets of Centralia at age 12. In sort of typical immigrant fashion, the store was a family venture. And I ended up working in the store practically every day, after school, weekends, and so forth, and did all manner of things in the store. My dad that decided to close that store because actually my mother had to get a side job and it wasn't adequate, and so he closes the store in Centralia. So my dad, typical fashion, says to me, I want you to drive with me to Tacoma. I don't know whether I'd been in Tacoma or not, but the bottom line was he wanted me to go with him to Tacoma. And I said, why do we want to go to Tacoma? He said, well, there's a guy there that has a little kind of store that he's trying to sell. He's got some stuff there, and I sort of want to go take a look because maybe I want to buy it. So he and I drive, and this is before the freeway, and it's old Highway 99, and it was a curvy drive, and so it wasn't like today. It was sort of a venture to even come from Centralia to Tacoma, but so we come here. And it turns out that this little store situation is on Market Street in downtown Tacoma, and it's located between South 11th and South 13th and Market Street, approximately in the middle of the block. And in those days, it was an actual market area. There were vegetable stands, there were meat markets, there were little odds and ends retail things, and it turns out that tucked away among these various things on Market Street in the back of one of these was a little space where this man had this so-called store. And so my dad and I went there and we met him and he showed us this stuff. And I think he said he wanted like $500 or something for whatever this was. And so I still remember to this day, my dad says, well, let's go talk. My dad and I end up standing on the sidewalk somewhere between the middle of 11th and 13th and Market Street. And he decided, okay, we're going to buy this for $500 because he actually didn't have very much money left after closing the Centralia store. So he bought it. And we came to Tacoma, and there was a little detail the man didn't disclose, and that was that the landlord had given him a notice he had to move, and so it was a complex situation. But that's how we arrived in Tacoma, and I was 17, and I was going into my senior year of high school, and so I enrolled at Stadium High School. Stadium had a student population of about 2,000. It was huge compared to the farm school that I went to in Centralia, which was a school of about 300. In Centralia, I learned to play the clarinet, and I played in the school band. And so when I got to Stadium, I tried out for it. I made the school band in the clarinet section. And so that sort of became my first social contact was with people in the band. And then, gradually I met some other people, kids. Some of them were, we, at that time in Jewish community in Tacoma, there were basically two Jewish congregations. One of them was what we call Reform, which is, again, on the other end of the scale from this situation I had in Shanghai. And then in the middle, there's something called Conservative. And at that time, there were those two congregations. And we had some affiliation with the Conservative congregation. And through that, I also met some other kids in Tacoma that were Jewish, and so that's how I started making my social contacts in the two different situations. And typically, I think of kids, teenagers. You want to fit in, you want to be part of the group, and you don't want to particularly go out of your way to stand out, right? I would say the one thing that I did do was I went through a period where I would say from the time I was probably 13, 14 years old to up to the time that I went to Stadium, I didn't go out of my way to talk German, particularly publicly, okay? Although I will tell you that, and I guess I'm thinking now what would have prompted me to do it is that by the time I get to Stadium High School, where they teach German, they have a German class, language class, I took German. I enrolled in that German class on purpose because I basically wanted to get back to whatever I had forgotten. And then actually I took German also at the University of Puget Sound, College of Puget Sound, where I went after Stadium. My dad eventually ended up with a store on the corner of 13th and Broadway in downtown Tacoma, which was called the Discount Mart. And the Discount Mart was, again, one of those places that had one of everything in case a customer came in and said, I need a pair of purple munk lugs. The proposition would be, oh, yes, we have that someplace. Let me go find it, okay? Well, I ended up working in that store uh, also most days after school. After Kate and I married, and by that time I was a lawyer. I had graduated from law school and I had passed the bar exam. And my first job was as the law clerk for the Chief Justice of the Washington State Supreme Court. But also during that same period, if my dad needed me to help in the store, I'd go to the store and I'd do whatever. If he said, well, I need the floor, we need to sweep the floor, I'd sweep the floor, or we need to stock the shelves, or I need you to come in and help wait on the customers, I would do it. And so a story that Kate and I still remember is that one day she said to me, after she was comfortable in asking me this, she said, I have to ask you a question. There's something I don't understand. And I said, what is it? And she said, well, you're a lawyer. You work for this judge in Olympia. Yeah. And then when your dad says he needs you in the store, you go down and you sweep the floor, you do whatever. And the way we've always remembered it is that I stop and I look at her like, I don't understand the question. And I would say, well, and she said, well, I don't understand this. Why do you go to the store? And I think my answer would have been, because that's just part of the whole deal. I'm going to the College of Puget Sound, working at the store. And one day, and I'm taking business courses. And so one day my dad says to me during my freshman year, he said, so what are you learning up there at school? And I said, oh, a lot of good stuff. Well, like what? Well, like economics, whatever. And he said, oh, okay. So what are you going to do with this when you finish? And I said, well, in those days, this is the late 1950s, and it's essentially the proposition is you go to college and then you get a good job. And so that was my answer, is that I'll get a good job. And he said, well, what does that mean? And I said, well, I'll go to work for a company, big company. And he said, how much are you going to earn? And I said, well, probably in those days, $700 to $800 a month. And he said, that's all, if you can put in all this time and work? And I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, you don't have to go to all that trouble. Just come work in the store full time and I'll pay you that now. And I said, but I don't want to work in the store for the rest of my life. So he told me, he said, look, he said, in Germany, I left school when I was 16 because I wanted to go into business. And all I know is that if you went to the university in Germany, when you finished, you had a profession. You had something you could do. You could be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, but you didn't just say, I'm going to get a good job. One of the courses I really enjoyed was accounting the first year, so I was sort of thinking about accounting, and then eventually I discovered in those days that if you could manage to get into law school at the University of Washington after your junior year of college, and you got in, and then you managed to survive the first year, and you still needed some upper level credits to get your undergraduate degree, you could transfer back credits from the University of Washington Law School to the College of Puget Sound, and you would still end up with an undergraduate degree. So I actually applied for, and I managed to get into law school after my junior year of college, and I was 20 years old. And that's a whole different story because I ended up in a completely different world. Academically, it was so different than anything that I ever knew, and at the beginning it was very hard, but I eventually sort of caught on to law school, and I did well in law school too. But that's how I got to law school. And I was just 20 years old. There were 125 in that class, and I was the second youngest out of those 125. My first law office was located in South Tacoma, 5407 South Tacoma Way. And this is back in the 1960s. And I had a partner, and in those days, there was a genuine sort of a business community in that area. Eventually, I became appointed to the Tacoma Public Library Board, and I was on the Tacoma Public Library Board for 10 years, 1984, I think, to 1994, and during that 10-year period, there was I think it was a $30 million bond issue that was implemented to build several new libraries, including the one in the North End, one in the South End, during that 10-year period. And so I was very much involved with that. I became very much involved with bar association activities. I was the president of the Tacoma Pierce County Bar Association in 1988. And while I served as president and subsequent to that, I actively started a Tacoma Pro Bono program of the Bar Association, which means providing legal assistance for people who cannot afford to hire attorneys, okay, in civil matters, not criminal. And I managed to obtain originally a $7,000 grant to start this program. And today, that program has a budget of $4.5 million, and it has 55 staff people. It's called Tacoma Pro Bono, they changed the name, Tacoma Pro Bono Lawyers. There's a website and so forth. And I personally have done a lot of pro bono legal work. And in fact, I still do it every second and fourth Thursday of the month. The program I just talked about, they provide me 3 or 4 clients to call to provide legal advice. And they send me a sheet with a description of what these people's issue is and what the problem is. And so I still do that to this day, okay? And I think, to be candid about it, a part of my purpose in doing that part of what I'm just talking about is sort of a payback situation, an opportunity for me to give a little payback because, today, at my age and everything that I've experienced and everything that I've had the benefit of, I feel like I'm a very, very fortunate person. Very fortunate that I survived. I could well not have survived. B, that I came to this country, that I had the benefit of a great education, and that I've had now 60 plus years, it's actually 62 years, of doing something every day that I like to do, which is essentially to help people. And of course, in the process, I've also been able to, myself and my family, we've been able to have a great life. And so I think that's what motivates me to this day, to keep trying to give something back. And so in terms of the other part of what I've done is I've been very active in the Jewish community. I've been the president of the temple. There's also an organization which is called the Tacoma Jewish Community Fund, which is an independent 501c3 charitable organization that has a fund drive every year to provide grants to not only Jewish but also other local charities like the food banks and that sort of thing. And I've been involved with that now for 50 years. And part of that, it also has a very strong component with regard to the support of the state of Israel, which of course I have a very close feeling about. Um, but in terms of activity, I've been very much involved also with the Tacoma Jewish Community Fund, and I'm involved to this day. There is an organization in Seattle called the Holocaust Center for Humanity, which has been in existence for about 45 years. And the bottom line is that as part of what they do, which is at this point is an educational mission primarily aimed at educating school children, we did the presentation at a junior high in East Tacoma a couple of 3 years ago. And it was to a very diverse group of kids, um, maybe 50 of them. And by diverse, I meant the group was, Asian kids and black kids. And I think within it, there were some kids that were from immigrant families and so forth. And so in the question period, one kid who I think was 12, 13 years old, whatever, he raises his hand and he says to me, "When did you really feel free?" That was the question. And you know what? I actually sort of stood back and I thought, I don't think anybody's ever asked me that. And I gave a response, but I don't think the response is the important part of it. It's the fact that the story conveyed to that kid, who I don't know what his background was or what his experience was, but I'm going to guess he was an immigrant kid that was sort of going through the adjustment period and was trying to figure out, when did I get to the point where I just felt like, hey, I can really do what I want to do here. My advice to immigrants would be to, first of all, try to identify and find the resources available to you within the community to help you assimilate and find out what you want your place to be in the community and how you want to get by and how your family is going to get by, okay? And secondly, that it's a process. It's a process. It can't happen if you're coming from a completely different place, an environment, a different language. You can't just turn the page and all of a sudden everything is in place. So you have to have some patience for it to happen. And if it happens, I mean, if you work at it, and of course you have to not only you, but your family as a whole needs to work at the process and get yourself established and go from there. And if you're talking about kids, if you're a kid, you need to take advantage of educational opportunity because that's going to be your ticket to get someplace and go beyond what perhaps your parents are going to accomplish in this country. What I'm most proud of is my family. We didn't mention the fact that we had 3 children. Unfortunately, we lost one, but we have a son and a daughter at this point. They're both very well put together, successful people. We have some grandchildren, and so I'm most proud of the fact that we've got the family, and I'm just proud of the fact that I've been able to enjoy what I've enjoyed over all these years. And I think Tacoma was a great place to land with permanency because Tacoma has offered a place in which we have enjoyed raising our family. We have enjoyed living here. We have felt that we have had everything that you could have here. And obviously, I mentioned the fact that we've traveled, we've been to all these other countries, but we never have had any thought about moving anywhere else. And that's because our roots are here and we're happy here. And I also think that, in terms of location, proximity, we like to do other things that you find in larger cities, like in Seattle. There's more theater, there's a little more music available, with the kind of music we like. But you've got some of it in Tacoma, and you've got proximity to whatever you want. And I think we've been just perfectly happy in Tacoma, and we think it's got offers whatever you need.